Hello and welcome to Last Mixtape Podcast. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show, we review Fontaines D.C's much anticipated new album Romance and bring you all the music from the week that was. But first, yes, you're very welcome back to Last Mixtape Podcast with me, Stephen White. And on this week's episode, we finally get to review Fontaines D.C's new album, Romance, their fourth album in total, and I wonder which we can call them a post-punk band any longer. I do not know. We'll see as we delve into the review. But before we get into the review, if you'll indulge me for a second, I would like to read to you a passage from Cubisme from Albert Glees and Jean Metzinger from 1912, sort of a manifesto, if you will, of the Cubist movement, certainly the largest written work from it from the time. And so the excerpt is this. To understand Cézanne is to foresee Cubism. Henceforth, we are justified in saying that between this school and previous manifestations, there is only a difference of intensity, and that in order to assure ourselves of this, we have only to study methods of this realism, which, departing from the superficial reality of Colbert, plunges with Cézanne into profound reality, growing luminous as it forces the unknowable to retreat. Now, dear viewer and dear listener, you may be wondering why in a review of a 2024 album by the Fontaines, am I referencing a Cubist manifesto of sorts from 1912 from a modernist art movement? Well, one, because all other music critics are cowards and they won't do it themselves. And two, because I can? No, there is a reason to this madness. And basically, it is the idea that in order to deconstruct, we must first learn how to construct. Now, this is album number 4 from the Fontaines. Doggerel, their debut, was a feral album, a punkish album. It was incredibly immediate. It spoke to a band that were ready to burst out of the tracks and grab the world by the throat, in which they did with that album. You know, songs like Big and such like that really had a force to it, really had a bounce to it, really spoke to the younger men they were at that time. Heroes Death album 2 refined that sort of sound down, honed it a bit, added a few little extra layers and little touches to it, but basically was a kind of a stepping stone album in a lot of ways. One that just took the sound that was Doggerel, opened it up a bit, nicer production, cleaner kind of sounds and stuff like that, and really kind of brought it forward. Skinty Fia, their last album, was much more different. It was gothic, it was dark, it had an incredibly suffocating tone to it. It was deeply layered. There was airs of traditional Irish music in it. There was speaking of living in the diaspora. There was a gothic sense of the post-punk that throughout their time as a band, Fontaines had portrayed. Well, still holding a little bit of that immediacy, a little bit more of that feralness, but you can say that it was a far more darkly lit record than the others. Doggerel has its aggression, Heroes That has a more refinement to it, a more explorative sense, and Skinty Fia is incredibly more thematic. So, by the time we get to Romance, the band have established a sense of themselves, established a sense of their songwriting, established a sense of what they can do with their songwriting in the studio, and established a sense that they are willing to explore themes, willing to have albums that are thematic in both their sonic sense and their dynamic sense and their stylistic sense, certainly with Skinty Fia. So I thought going into this record, I have to say, and I think I said it on a podcast before, that I believed that almost that the Fontaines were going towards the more traditional element that you could see in Skinty Fia, the use of the Irish language and such. I will not try to pronounce the name of the song, but the first song on the album. I thought it was going to go in those realms. It was going to go into a more kind of gothic, traditional, mixed with post-punk thing. Maybe in the next album, this one, we would see a kind of a hero's death to Skinty Fia's gothic kind of exploration, kind of a more honed and more refined sense of that, and that they were going to go down an avenue. I did wonder, would they kind of almost go into an area of kind of Arctic Monkeys, you know, delving into something where Arctic Monkeys kind of, you know, started as kind of baggy pants, scruffy lads, you know, I bet you look good on the dance floor, kind of into more, you know, from working with like Josh Homme and stuff like that, into almost a little bit Queens of the Stone Age-esque with their kind of rock kind of, AM kind of type sound, and then finally into kind of impersonating Scott Walker for a couple of albums, and then into kind of a parody now, Elvis type thing. I thought maybe would Fontaines go down a similar route, and some people I think maybe making the same comparisons, and I think it's an apt one for certain. But with Romance, we have seen something quite different, and they have where the road, especially in terms of Irish music right now, the Irish music scene right now is going down a road of, and I love these bands, but you have like Lankum, the Mary Wallopers, you have, Kneecap, going into that kind of sense of Irish, that sense of traditionalism, melded with other modern musics, of course. I thought that's where the Fontaines were going. They took a hard right on that and have gone into a more kind of experimentation in the basement, new colours, new sounds. Even the look of the band has entirely changed. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about how that mirrored something in U2 and their change from Joshua Tree to Octung Baby. They looked like two different bands. Gone was the kind of the po-faced sincerity of the Joshua Tree, replaced by Bono's The Fly, leather jacket wearing Elvis, Jim Morrison type thing. And it's not a million miles away here. So, what is Romance then, if it is not those things? What is its relation to Du Cubisme by Glees and Metzinger? Well, it's a sonic sea change. The production is very much at the forefront of this album. It is very much using the studio as a tool. Sounds are contorted, the guitars are contorted, turned into different things, different kind of resonancies. Green's vocal is moved around from the forefront to the background. There's strings, there's orchestral things. It's an album that contains multitudes. It's an interchanging album that has more air to it than Skinty Fia's more suffocating sound. But in that air finds ways to have a more processed sound, a more kind of resonant sound. There's bits of kind of great pop songs, there's ballads, there's experimentation, there's just straight out kind of songs that could be from the Doggerel era but put through this kind of thresher and filter of the new production, which is incredibly interesting because it feels, again, to kind of bring it back to that Octung Baby comparison, much like Octung Baby could have Mysterious Ways and one in the same album and Until the End of the World, Till the End of the World. This album has those moments, was maintaining their core sensibility, bringing it into the cubism and the idea of being able to construct while being able to deconstruct. The previous three albums show the ability to construct, show the ability that they are songwriters that are well able to manage their craft, that are able to manage also the studio and not become overwhelmed by it. By the time we get to Romance, songs that in previous albums would have a more kind of straight post-punk sound with kind of inflections, different kind of production techniques, are very much turned and contorted and changed throughout. The song that kind of captures this most in terms of its relation maybe to the earlier days is Here's the Thing, which has that kind of feral sound, but the guitars are far more affected. There's more happening in the textural nature of the band and the music. Fontaines have always been a band that, as much as they've come on, are incredibly tight as a band. I've seen them multiple times in multiple guises, and they're always a band that you have to say are just incredibly tight as a group. There's a real engine there from the bass and the drums and guitars and stuff to like really propel the music forward as Green is doing his thing as well. And Tom on the drums and Digo on the bass and stuff like that, and Curly and the guys, it really just kind of propels the music forward. And I think it really feels like there's kind of a basis there for the sound. So Here's the Thing has that kind of sound to it. It also reminded me a little bit, and there's kind of inflections of a lot of different influences, and I wonder if this was one, but Here's the Thing really kind of got me as a almost early Manic Street Preachers, circa Holy Bible, but maybe not as, again, suffocating as a Holy Bible. Holy Bible is an incredibly suffocating record to listen to, but that kind of process, snarl, rigidness, kind of augmented digital nature of Holy Bible, where the band were at their most, aggressive, certainly in tone and in scale. I think there's a lot of that in it, or maybe even like the earlier kind of sounds of the Manics is in Here's the Thing. I really feel that. I kind of contrast that then with the latest single, which is in the album, In the Modern World, which takes on, and it was interesting because when I listened to the song first, I really liked it. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it took me a couple of listens. But my partner messaged me, he was like, does this sound, what does it remind you? And it was like, it reminds me of Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Power of Love in terms of its strings. Now, there is this propellant guitar line going in it, which is very 80s. In kind of like the Cars and things like that, but it has that kind of grandeur, and certainly in Green's voice, there is that bit of Power of Love, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, crooning almost. We were talking about crooning and Arctic Monkeys, stay away. But no, it does work, and it works in this nature. But also it shows that what they're doing in Romance has many facets. It's not just one sound. It's not just screaming at you. It's the band moving away, as I said in the previous one, moving away from the post-punk nature and kind of backdrop and saying that is something we did, that was a period, that was our era of this, if you want to call it that, but we've moved on. We're taking our steps in different directions now, and it starts here. Shout out to everyone who liked the angry men shouting into microphones part of that. The bubble burst is coming. Hi. Yeah, but in terms of that, they do kind of change it, and they do kind of add these strings, which is these great moments of grandeur, which is hinted at the previous albums. We talk about that again. There's bits of that in Hero's Death. There's definitely bits of that in Skinty Fia. There's always a feeling with Fontaines, and when you listen to it in comparison to other bands in and around their sphere, who are also trying, I think, as well to get away, move themselves away from their earlier work, it feels like it's more natural to Fontaines. It feels like this is quite a natural change, that all of these things were kind of signposted in ways. There's a song on the album as well called Bug, which has reminiscent kind of feels of like early REM. There's that kind of jangle to it. It's a 2-minute track, but it adds yet again another flourish to the record that is an incredibly colourful record in its presentation, obviously visually, in what the band have been doing in terms of promoting the record. We talked about that in the Octung Baby idea and the Ardenton Corbin work. But in terms of its kind of sonic thing, it's not one thing. You cannot say that there is this singular overarching element that runs through the record, much like Octung Baby and albums like it. It moves, and the thread through the album is the band. The thread through the album is how they do it. The thread through the album is the guitars by Carlos and Curly, and as I say, the engine of Diego and Tom, and then with Green as this kind of forefront narrator. Favourite, though, which closes out the album, is very interesting because it is the Fontaines at their most poppy. It is a song that would be very much at home in the 90s, and there's a lot of comparisons to the 90s when talking about this record. But it is the poppiest Fontaines song that is allowed to be poppy. It is very much given the room. Like other songs, as I say, on Doggerel and on Hero's Death, I don't think they enter into the pop era. Well, maybe in a couple of moments in Skinty Fia, but definitely in the other two, there are real moments where it could have been, big radio pop song and radio indie pop. I'm not talking about pop in the other sense, but in radio indie pop. And they kind of, through their kind of old feral nature, kind of offset that and make it a bit harder. With Favourite, it's this big sing-along anthemic track that is allowed to be anthemic, it's allowed to breathe. You can feel that the songwriters, the Fontaines' songwriters, are kind of giving themselves the room to do that, giving themselves the room to create hooks, create kind of those sing-along moments, feel like that, because they're a band that play big venues, they're a band that have big audiences. That's a different beast, in terms of how you relate to that, how you relate a band to it, how you perform, I remember talking to somebody once before, and we were talking about the Hero's Death album, and it feeling like, when you are a band like that, you need to have songs that make people move in the audience, that make people kind of sway or dance or mosh or whatever you want to do, but have that ability. And I think Favourite is definitely their most poppy track. I messaged Kate won't mind me saying, I messaged Kate, Brendan Harding, who's a friend of the show, about that. I was like, is this their most poppiest song? And I think she was saying, yeah, I think it feels like it for certain. It feels like their most poppiest movement. And it's interesting that it comes at the end of the album. I always feel like end of album songs are more telling on what's to come than anything else. Like in a continuation sense, I always think of Queen Bitch by David Bowie as that, because the album that follows that, Queen Bitch, and the song Queen Bitch, the next album is Ziggy. And it's like, oh, there it is. There's the glam rock feel of it. But the most interesting track on Romance is, I love this name, such a beautiful name, Hoarseness is the Wilderness. And definitely the most beautiful and interesting and sprawling work by the band have ever constructed, I think. And possibly, to me, their best work is this. This is a sprawling track, and it feels, again, almost like Favourite was the band finally spreading their wings and allowing themselves to be a little bit more poppy in a song. This is them really delving into that balladeering, into that kind of, I spoke about Scott Walker in relation to the Arctic Monkeys, but into that kind of realm of the Scott Walkers and people like that. It's grandiose, it has these beautiful strings, but what's interesting about it is in how the band interplay with that, especially in the drums. There's this distortion, there's this hardness. It's still the Fontaines in there. They're not losing themselves in maybe the way that the Arctic Monkeys would eventually, I feel, do towards the end, where they're still keeping that sense of themselves. And that was, for me, the key track where I felt they've always been able to do this. This has always been in their canon. With Romance, they're showing that the past is the past. The other albums, and I'm sure they love those albums and have worked very hard on it, especially like Skinty Fia, feels more like a transitional album now that we look at Romance. But that they're entering into a new space, they're entering into a new way of playing. What the next album holds, who knows? It's a very long way away, I would imagine. Right now, they are in an area where they're mixing in with kind of indie pop stadium-y kind of stuff. There's still that punkish element. There's these pop elements that are almost made for kind of stadium stuff. There's an experimentation. There's so many colors on the canvas with Romance that it's absolutely beautiful to watch, and it's very interesting as well because it's daring. This is an album, when you look at the promotion for it, and I think they've done such a great job, and I spoke about that before, but this could have fallen flat on its face. It could have. If you were to just look at where they began and where they're, and where they established themselves and the foundation of everything else, and you say, fast forward, God, how many years is it? 7, 8 years, however many years it is, to this, and just show them maybe the Starburster, which is a great song on the album as well, the Starburster video, and go, this is where they'll be in 8 years' time. This is where they'll be at. And maybe make them listen to Favourite. They'd be like, oh, that's not where we thought it was going. And it's bravery on their part to allow that experimentation, to go with it, follow it, see it through, execute it, and allow themselves to change, allow themselves to take what the Fontaines were in certainly 2 albums, 3, and deconstruct that, because they've already learned to construct. And in the quote from the beginning, there is only a difference of intensity, and it feels like that they've added an intensity to their music in terms of what they use the studio as. It feels like the Fontaines are in there. The songs are the same songwriters writing. They're doing different things. They've learned. They've matured, but they've added this sonic intensity to it. This sonic deconstruction. This ability to not just let a guitar be a guitar, or not just let a song lie on the kind of the foundation of them as a 5-piece band, but expand out, rip it apart, start it up again, take songs and say, like, here's the thing, and add things to it that they wouldn't have added before, to fold out their music. I believe in the same manifesto, it speaks about not letting flowers be flowers as we know them, because that's what they were before, but it isn't what they are now. And that's very much what it is with the Fontaines. They are not what they were before, they are what they are now, in that kind of same thing as do Cubisme. It's a beautiful, beautiful record. It's so well done. It contains so many multitudes. It's the Fontaines, much like U2 in the early 90s, saying, we will not become a stereotype or pigeonholed by what we were before. We have the ability to expand because that ability was always in us. We will exist beyond this album, and we will exist beyond the previous 3. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, experimentation, come on, it's not exactly black MIDI. And that's not the point. Experimentation isn't just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. I like black MIDI, by the way. But it's not always that. Experimentation can be experimentation within the self. It can be experimentation within the artistic self. What is it that I've done before that I can expand on? What colours have I not used before? It isn't about just doing clever chords and different time signature changes. That's not enough. Or getting found sound and playing it over your thing. It has to be experimentation of the self that makes sense. And as I said at the beginning of this review, to deconstruct to a certain degree, you must learn first how to construct. And at this point, the Fontaines have moved into an era where they have taken what they were of the past and folded it out and laid it out, added new things to it, added the studio as a tool. And I think with this and Scinti Fia, it'll be interesting to see where they go next, because I was wrong. I was wrong about Scinti Fia and where I thought they were going. I could very well be wrong on where they're going to go after this. They could surprise us all and they could move back to something else. But they've shown us that they are a band that are able to do that and willing to do that. In short, dear listener and dear viewer, we've been on a bit of a journey with this review, but obviously, I highly recommend that you check out this record. You're already probably listening to it if you're already a fan of the Fontaines. If you're not a fan of the Fontaines, though, I would also say check out this record too. It is quite different from what's come before. There could be things within this record that capture you more than what has happened before. There are songs that might surprise you. I think In the Modern World will take a lot of people as well along with it. That song too is quite beautiful. And I hopefully, I don't think the band will ever listen or watch this, but the Manic Street Preachers, the R.E.M. and the Frankie Goes to Hollywood comparisons, and even the Britpop, they don't take offence to. But that's my feeling on the records. Yeah, look, everyone's saying listen to it. Everyone's saying it's a great album. You don't need me to say that. But I thought it was interesting to explore the idea of that deconstruction of the kind of that Cubist manifesto. Not calling the album Cubist in any way, but in that idea of a difference of intensity. And I think that's what we have with Fontaine's Romance. And it is out now for you to listen to on all the places and spaces you want to listen to a great record. Yes, dear listener, they seek him here, they seek him there, those musos seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven or is he at the disco? That damned elusive Count of Monte playlist. Oh yes, the style and profile and limousine ride Jeff Lyon playlist making son of gun has once again returned to the shores of Playlistia to bring another beautiful bounty in the form of TLMT's Irish mixtape and some new additions this week to the playlist. Mustard on the beat, yo, let's do this right now with Gurriers and their brand new single No More Photos, taken from their upcoming album. And yes, I love this immediate, rigid, noise-ridden, feral music. It kind of brings to mind bands like Thumper and stuff like that. We're talking about feral sounds and feral music with the Fontaines earlier on in the show. And Gurriers are an interesting one because they're becoming one of the very kind of like whispered about big bands. Maybe big bands going to happen with them. And it could do. We do like a big band. It could be them. And I think they're interesting because much like that, moving away, having different kind of sounds, having a different ability within your music to kind of move away from different things and having something more to yourself than I am angry, I am shouting into microphone. You should have more to yourself than that, and they do. They have a sound that really kind of feels like it's tempered in themselves and it's tempered about the world around them. They have this kind of music that kind of, it moves. We're talking about music that kind of can move an audience, and they're very much at that stage in their careers and just getting the attention by the throat kind of nature. And yeah, this is great. No More Photos by Gurriers. Check it out. Up next though, I'm going to change it. I'm going to switch it into a completely different genre because that is what the Count does, dear listener and dear viewer. Hello. El Coves up next with Calling It Love, and this is, I love great pop music. I love brilliantly written pop music. It's one of the hardest things to do is write great pop music. Far harder than just throwing spaghetti at the wall and experimentation. This is hard, and it is hard to do, especially when you're playing in music that is so evocative of icons like Taylor Swift and stuff like that. because it is so slickly produced. The highest quality of that is so slickly produced and so slickly written that you're reaching for the stars when you're doing it. And I think she absolutely kind of nails it. It's really good for this type of sound, for what she does. Importantly, she puts a lot of herself into it, a lot of herself into the vocal, a lot of herself into the songwriting. You know, she's not afraid to be more explicit with the lyrical content, which is great because that gives it a grounded sense. It gives it a relatable sense. It's not over here or over there. It is a person speaking to you in ways that people speak. And that's important with pop music, because pop music a lot of the times is popular not because there's a hook, but because it's relatable and people like it and can see themselves in it. So Elle Cole's Calling It Love has those qualities, and I think it's really great. You know, it's, as I say, it's difficult to swing for the fences, call your shot and hit it, and I think she does it, if I'm to use baseball terms, which I just did. Moving it and switching it up again though, by Curious and their latest release, Uncle Kevin. They have an album coming out as well. And yeah, this is an angular, interlocking, fuzz-ridden howl song from them. And I think it's interesting their kind of change, because they are a band that have been around a while. They've kind of, as a two-piece, kind of interlocking, creating a sound, big long passages of kind of instrumental kind of feel, instrumental kind of music that kind of switches rhythms, switches time signatures, all these kinds of things. And I've now honed it into something with these last couple of releases that seems a lot more focused, a lot more hard-hitting because of the focus, has that kind of contrast to it, takes what they've learned from playing with, you know, as a band together for so long, and kind of melds it into their current sound. It's not a million miles away from what they were doing, but it is, and it does feel more mature. It does feel more worked on. And I think, to me, this is their best work. You know, sometimes it's very hard taking a band that are big in the live sense, like loud, captures the imagination live set, and, you know, conveying that on record. That's a very difficult thing to do, and it's a thing that they do very well on Uncle Kevin, and it's on the playlist. Check it out. Next up, you have Abby Coulibaly and her brand new single, Glow. And it's a serene, vivid, swaying pop music. It has that grandiose feel to it that that great R&B has. Abby, as a vocalist, is somebody who can pull you into her performances. She has the voice, she has the kind of timbre of her voice that is perfect for the genre, and it's perfect for songs like this that have that kind of laid back feel, but it's got the hooks, it's got the feel to it, it's got the flow to it. She really kind of breathes within this music. She always feels like an artist that's just about to gonna break through. So it feels like it's coming for her, and with releases like this you can see why people are so engaged and so interested in and follow her as an artist, because yeah, when she delivers like this, she certainly delivers and has that quality that you look for, and that quality that speaks to people. And Glow is no different from Abby Coulibaly, and that is up on the playlist. Check it out. Next up, and finally, we have Enola Gay with their brand new single, Cortana. And again, a kind of a scratching, forceful sound. We were talking with Gorriers about the kind of the feral nature of things. These guys go for a more industrial, more textural kind of sound to it. There's a harshness to it. There's a kind of growl to it. There's this fuzz to it that it's unwelcoming, it's unfriendly. The vocals are very much engulfed by the music itself, engulfed by the texture. Again, moving away from, it's not enough to just be an angry man screaming into a microphone. And that you have to actually change it up. You have to actually have layers to it. You have to actually do stuff with the music that interlocks it with it, because people can get fatigued by just that. You need to engage people with themes, with moods, with tones that take you somewhere. And on this, Enola Gay certainly do that, and certainly capture that with Cortana, as a band that have that immediacy to them and have a craft and a way of songwriting that lends itself to being beyond that of just impact, but having a lasting effect beyond it. And certainly this song has it. It's up on the playlist, and that is that for the count this week. All of these tracks are on TLMT's Irish Mixtape on Spotify. You got to check it out and subscribe and listen to it, and listen to music in any way you want. Listen to these songs in any way you want. Buy the music, listen to music, go to the gigs of bands that you want to go to. But for now, the count shall rest, but he shall return next week with another beautiful bounty, dear listener. But that's it for this week, and on to the rest of the show. And so it goes, and there it went. But before I go, thank you for listening and for watching the Last Mixtape podcast. You can subscribe to us in all the usual places and spaces on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. So please do click link and subscribe and click the likes and the comments and anything, please, to help the podcast grow. I'd be eternally grateful. You can also submit your music to me at stephen@thelastmixtape.com with the heading TLMT Podcast, and I'll hopefully be able to get back to you there with any kind of musical recommendations or thoughts on the podcast that you have. But for now, that was the Last Mixtape Podcast. You were the listener and the viewer. I was Steve White. Hey, so long.